The Toronto Blue Jays opened their inaugural Major League Baseball season at home on April 7, 1977. It was Exhibition Stadium, and they beat the Chicago White Sox 9-5 in front of about 45,000 fans. Also, it snowed that day. I'm Larry Fedoruk, and this is Later That Same Life. On each episode of my weekly podcast, a different topic, discussion, or story from our lives.
Season 17, Chapter 12.
Let's go, Blue Jays.
At the time of this recording, the Toronto Blue Jays are in the latter half of their 49th Major League Baseball season. In the previous 48, the team has had 27 seasons above 500, qualified for the playoffs 10 times, and are one of only a handful of teams in baseball to win back-to-back World Series, 1992, 1993. You know baseball, they love the stats. I'm not the biggest baseball fan in the world, although of the major league sports it is my favorite. This week on the podcast, I thought it might be fun to look back at the Jays. They've become Canada's team, at least as far as baseball goes. And this will not be a sports podcast per se. You know me, I'm not really a sports guy. Canadians should remember that the Toronto Blue Jays were not the first MLB team in Canada. That distinction belongs to the Montreal Expos, who joined the league in 1969 and played right up until 2004. After financial issues and ownership struggles, the Expos reappeared in 2005 as the Washington Nationals, leaving the Jays as the only major league team headquartered outside of the continental United States. Major League Baseball was really the first big sports league to begin expansion, and that was in 1961. Before that, baseball teams simply moved around. The Brooklyn Dodgers moved to L.A., the Boston Braves moved to Milwaukee and then to Atlanta. The Seattle Pilots moved to Milwaukee to become the Brewers. The Kansas City A's moved to Oakland, who now play out of West Sacramento and may move to Vegas. The Washington Senators eventually became the Texas Rangers. Yeah, it's all kind of crazy. But 1961, it was expansion. Controversial, big changes in the somewhat staid game of baseball. That year, they added the Los Angeles Angels and those aforementioned Washington Senators. A year later, in 62, they added the New York Mets and the Houston Colt 45s. Always nice to have a team named after a beer. Oh, I know Colt 45 is a popular gun, but in 1962, it was better known as a beer than it was a firearm. Of course, in 1965, they became the Houston Astros, coinciding with the opening of their new stadium, the Astrodome, Major League Sports' first indoor facility. And to me, the Astrodome has always been the ideal example for, I guess I didn't think this all the way through. Astrodome was chosen as a name to reflect the city of Houston's expanding role in the space program and aeronautics, NASA, and the nickname for Houston, which was Space City. Sounded like a good idea, a glass-covered ballpark, climate-controlled in the stifling heat of South Texas. When it opened in 1965, it was like, wow, we live in the future. And not only that, no more rainouts. We can play anytime, not just when the sun was shining. Oh yeah, about that. Apparently, that was a problem when the sun was shining. The glare off the glass panels made it really tough for players to see the ball when the sun was shining. I don't know how much you know about the game of baseball, but being able to see the ball is a crucial part of being successful in the game. Oh, no problem. We're a city of engineers. We'll figure it out. Ah, I got it. We'll paint and tint the glass panels to eliminate the glare. And that worked, except with no natural light coming in. It meant all the grass died. That's why they came up with AstroTurf. That's why we have AstroTurf. That's where the name comes from, fake turf. The early versions of which were a nightmare to play on and led to many career-ending injuries and ailments. Well, I guess you didn't think it through.
Well, I didn't think I had.
So where were we? Oh yeah, expansion. Houston, 1962, with also the Mets. Next expansion year was the Expos year, 1969, which also saw the addition of the Kansas City Royals, San Diego Padres, and the Seattle Pilots. As mentioned, they became the Brewers, and they became the Brewers on the very next year after expansion. Next expansion was the Blue Jays year, 1977. The other new franchise was the Seattle Mariners. You see, back in 1970, after the Seattle Pilots fiasco, and they moved to Milwaukee, the city of Seattle sued Baseball's American League. You can't just promise us a team and then just move a team. So as part of the settlement, they received an expansion franchise in 1977. Speaking of stats, to this day, the Seattle Mariners are the only Major League Baseball team that has never been in a World Series. And as a footnote to expansion, the Colorado Rockies and Florida Marlins, now Miami Marlins, entered baseball in 1993, the Arizona Diamondbacks and Tampa Bay Devil Rays in 1998. Tampa has since exorcised their devil and are now just called the Rays. It's always been interesting to me, too, that there's no such city officially as Tampa Bay. It's Tampa. Tampa's harbor is on Tampa Bay, and the locals refer to the greater metropolitan area as Tampa Bay. So call yourselves whatever you want, I guess, but there's no such city as Tampa Bay. Anyway, those were the last two expansion teams in baseball, the Diamondbacks and the Rays. Right now there's talk of bringing new teams to places like Sacramento, Charlotte, Salt Lake City, San Antonio, Nashville, Orlando, maybe even Mexico City. And as Canadians, we know that every couple of years, the notion comes up of once again having an Expos team in Montreal. The current baseball commissioner has actually said he would like to see two new teams, one east, one west, before his term comes up in 2029. So in 1977, and for 28 seasons, Canada had two Major League Baseball teams. Anyone remember the Pearson Cup, the trophy awarded to the winner of a single game between the Jays and the Expos? The original idea was to pit these two Canadian teams against each other for one game as a fundraiser for minor league ball in Canada. The Pearson Cup was named after Canadian Prime Minister Pearson B. Cupp. No, actually it was Lester B. Pearson, who, by the way, was heavily into baseball, actually served as the honorary chair of the Montreal Expos after his tenure as Prime Minister. The Pearson Cup game was held from 1978 to 1986, mostly. The first one was 1978, June 29, and the plan was to make it as close to Canada Day as possible. But it was only an exhibition game, so it had to be scheduled around two different baseball teams' regular season play. That proved difficult. You had to have open dates, stadium availability, travel time. So over the years, the game ended up being played in April or May or even September, whenever they could actually arrange it. In 1979 and 85, the games were actually abandoned due to these league conflicts. And again in 1987, no suitable date could be found. And after that, the idea was pretty much dead. In 1997, however, Major League Baseball introduced interleague play, which they still do to this day, games between American and National League teams. Jays were an American League team, Expos in the National League. So in 2003 and 2004, they revived the Pearson Cup idea, and it would go to the winners of a 6-game interleague series between the two teams, usually 3 in Toronto, 3 in Montreal. Except, inexplicably, in 2004, amid the Expos franchise troubles, Major League Baseball put the last 3 games between these two teams in a stadium in Puerto Rico. What the? And of course, the following year, the Expos moved to D.C. And who knows, if expansion ever means a return of baseball to Montreal and a new Expos, maybe the Pearson Cup will make a comeback as well. The Toronto Blue Jays remain the only team in Major League Baseball, outside of the continental United States, to win a World Series. And as I said, one of the few teams in history to win back-to-back World Series. How tough is that to do? They are the first team ever to play in a convertible home stadium, and to this day I prefer the name Sky Dome. Only twice in baseball history has a walk-off home run won a World Series. The first was 1960, Bill Mazeroski of the Pittsburgh Pirates, bottom of the ninth, Game 7, a home run to defeat the New York Yankees. Don't expect you to care or remember that. It's just fun to be able to rattle off baseball trivia as if you know what you're talking about. Oh, Bill Mazeroski. Oh, yeah, for sure, yeah. Then it didn't happen again until 1993, and the Joe Carter Game 6 smash to beat the Philadelphia Phillies. It was October 23rd, 1993. I was at that game with my son, who had just turned 12. It's one of the great father-son memories of all time. How we came to be at that game is an interesting story. I've shared part of it before. These days we associate the Joe Carter home run with the famous Tom Cheek broadcast call of the Touch Them All Joe.
Here's a pitch on the way, a swing and a belt, left field, way back, Blue Jays win it! The Blue Jays are World Series champions as Joe Carter hits a 3-run home run in the 9th inning, and the Blue Jays have repeated as World Series champions. Touch 'em all, Joe. You'll never hit a bigger home run in your life.
Tom Cheek, Jerry Howarth, they were the hometown radio voices of the Jays for decades. However, a lot of people watched that series on TV, hearing the American network coverage. And that year was provided by CBS, Sean McDonough and Tim McCarver in the booth, and the overall broadcast was hosted by Andrea Joyce and Pat O'Brien. At the time, I was co-hosting a morning radio show on Mix 99.9 FM in Toronto. And as you can imagine, that October, talking about the Jays in the World Series was a daily thing. One morning, early, like 5:30, on the air, we're debating the hosting job of Pat O'Brien. I think I was a fan of his, and my co-host was not. Could have been the other way around, doesn't matter. And our producer says, hey, we got a guy on the phone, says he's Pat O'Brien of CBS. Yeah, sure he is. Somehow we verify this, and we put him on the air. He tells us that he's in the car with his producer, and they're driving to the airport, and they heard us talking about him. You see, the first 2 games were in Toronto, and then there would be 3 in Philly, and if necessary, 2 back in Toronto, so this was after game 2. He tells us that he and his producer have this rule that when they travel to different cities covering sporting events, they always tune their rental car radio to 99.9 because that's usually where the good music is. Then when he heard us talking about him, he decided to call us. So we talked a little baseball on the air, a little Canada versus America. It's all fun and good. And he says, hey, who's your baseball insider? So we say, well, you know, our station doesn't have the rights to the games, and we're not really a sports station, so we don't really have anyone. So he says, I'll do it. You just call me after each game, and we'll do a whole thing. How cool is that? You know, morning shows in Toronto are very competitive. And for us to suddenly have the CBS guy, well, that's pretty cool. And he's true to his word. And when the Phillies stave off elimination in Game 5, everybody returns to Toronto. Pat and his producer even invite us out to dinner the night before Game 6. I can't remember the name of the restaurant, but it was the hot place to be in the day. I would have had to wait 8 months for a reservation, even though I was a Toronto radio personality. But he was like, yeah, table for 4 tonight, see you around 8. So in person, Pat O'Brien turned out to be the biggest asshole. Talked about himself the entire night. He was rude to the waitstaff. He would degrade Toronto and Canada. Could barely get through the evening. The next day, well, someone must have said something to him because I guess by way of an apology, we get a note with 2 tickets each to see the game. My son and my tickets were amazing. I mean, nobody could get tickets to Game 6. And suddenly we had these 2 seats inside first base, about 20 rows up. I should mention, too, my co-host was female, and Pat O'Brien was pretty much hitting on her constantly. So her 2 tickets were for the CBS private luxury box. Open bar, catered. It was a party, about 30 people. From what I learned later, I guess my co-host and Pat had some words. She basically guilted him for shoving me down way in the seats while everybody wined and dined up there. And by the way, my son and I didn't care. We had great seats. We were having a great time. But about halfway through the game, a CBS page taps me on the shoulder and says, Mr. O'Brien would like to know if you and your son want to come up and watch the rest of the game in the private box. I look at my son, he looks at me, we talk it over quickly, we decide, yeah, why not? In the box, O'Brien shows up, and he says hello to my son, he signs an autograph, he gives my son a CBS Sports pin. I think he was just trying to sort of save his reputation. As we know, Carter wins the game, wins the series. The place goes nuts. People in our box are cheering and jumping up and down and hugging. They're throwing their programs and papers out into the crowd. Some guys were running into the washroom, grabbing all the rolls of toilet paper and tossing them as big unraveling streamers. I look over and I see my son picking cold shrimp off a tray and tossing it into the crowd. Hey, what are you doing? He says, gee, Dad, everybody was throwing something. I just wanted something to throw. I was like, yeah, okay, just not shrimp. Anyway, that's pretty much my Game 6 story. Except we did head out onto Yonge Street to be part of the impromptu parade and celebration. It was so packed, scary packed. We had taken the subway to the game, and you couldn't even get into one. It was so crowded. We had to walk like 6 blocks east just to get out of the crowd and find a cab to take us back to our car. And to this day, I wonder if there's a guy out there who has a Game 6 story that goes, yeah, I was there in the stands. And after Joe Carter hit his home run, I got hit by a shrimp. My son still has the ticket stubs. Years later, we managed to find an autographed Joe Carter jersey. Great souvenirs. But, nothing will beat the memories. For years, I would remember Pat O'Brien rather unfondly. Then a while back, he did this big thing where he admitted to battling depression and alcoholism. I do remember him pounding back the booze at dinner. Anyway, I thought, yeah, I guess the guy was dealing with all that. Probably more the booze talking in the day. So today I still remember him unfondly, but I give him the benefit of the excuses. Those Jays days featured some of the great players we'll always remember, like Joe Carter, Roberto Alomar, Tony Fernandez, Alfredo Griffin, Paul Molitor, John Olerud, Dwayne Ward, Juan Guzman. Oh, there's just so many. And all managed by Cito Gaston. Not till years later, in the Jose Bautista and Josh Donaldson era, did we have such notable Blue Jays as we did in 92 and 93. I guess winning it all will give you that. The one name I'll always remember that rarely comes up is Gord Ash. Gord Ash was front office. We might remember Peter Bavasi, Pat Gillick, and Paul Beeston, but I always loved the Gord Ash story. Gord Ash in 1974, he receives his Bachelor of Arts from York University. He gets a job at the Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce, but he loves baseball. So in 1978, he's about 27 years old. He takes a job at the Jays ticket department. He quickly moves up to operations supervisor, then assistant director of stadium operations, then administrator of player personnel. By 1989, he's assistant general manager. And from 1995 to 2001, he was the general manager of the Blue Jays. Just such a great story of a guy who loved baseball.
I'm the assistant to the traveling secretary.
Kind of from the mailroom to the top job story. Wow. In 2001, when he was replaced by J.P. Ricciardi, he was hired as assistant GM for the Milwaukee Brewers, was general manager there for a time, and is now still with the club as director of special projects. Oh, one more name for the sake of trivia. Dave McKay. Dave McKay was the first native-born Canadian to play for the Toronto Blue Jays. As a matter of fact, he started at third base for that very first game, April 7th, 1977. Toronto was awarded that American League franchise in March of 1976. The ownership consortium consisted of the CIBC, Imperial Trust, and the greatest share, 45%, by Labatt Breweries. So when they had a naming contest, the word blue, as in Labatt Blue, was a major consideration in the contest. As a matter of fact, the second most popular choice for a team name was the Blues, the Toronto Blues. But the University of Toronto sports teams were all known as the Varsity Blues, so Blue Jays was chosen. You know, bird names, very popular in baseball. Out of over 30,000 named the team entries, apparently 154 people suggested Blue Jays. So they had a draw, and they declared one winner, Dr. William Mills, a periodontist from Etobicoke. He got the grand prize, a trip to Blue Jays spring training and a pair of season tickets. Before the Blue Jays moved to the convertible confines of Skydome in June of 1989, many of us have memories of Jays games by the lake at Exhibition Stadium, freezing our asses off. hope you enjoyed reminiscing about Canada's baseball team. I don't want to jinx it, but suddenly they have a great team this year. And it's always nice when your hometown baseball team is playing meaningful games in August and September, as opposed to when they're not. I would like to see them make it back to the World Series at least one more time in my lifetime, which means I'd better start saving up for shrimp.
Later That Same Life is written, voiced, and produced by Larry Fedoruk. LarryFedoruk37@gmail.com. Subscribe to Larry's podcast YouTube channel. Get automatic notifications with each new episode.